Alexander didn't sleep that night. The city outside his apartment stretched endlessly, lights blinking like distant stars, but his mind refused to settle. He lay awake, one arm draped over his eyes, replaying the same moment over and over again.
I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. Please, let me fix this.
Like someone who expected the world to hurt her again. And her name. Jade. He had asked for it quietly, just before the elevator doors closed. What's your name? She had hesitated, fingers tightening around the handle of her cleaning cart. Jade. One word. Soft. Careful. Like it had been spoken too many times by people who didn't stay. The next evening, Alexander stayed late again. He told himself it was coincidence, habit. But at 10:45 p.m., his eyes lifted instinctively toward the elevator. The doors opened. Jade stepped out. She moved more cautiously tonight, one hand resting briefly against her hip as she pushed the cart forward. The bruise from the fall was hidden beneath fabric, but he saw it anyway. She didn't look toward his office. She never did. Alexander watched from behind the glass, standing still, hands in his pockets, heart doing something unfamiliar. Waiting. Jade hated how aware she felt. Every step echoed louder than usual. Every sound felt amplified. Her heart refused to calm itself, even though she told herself the same thing over and over again. He's the CEO. It was just an accident. It meant nothing. But it hadn't felt like nothing. Not the way he knelt. Not the way he spoke to her like she mattered. Not the way he said her humming was peaceful. She reached the hallway outside his office and hesitated. Just for a second. Then she began to clean. That night, she didn't hum. Alexander noticed immediately. The silence felt heavier than before. He stepped out of his office. Jade. The sound of her name on his voice made her freeze. She turned slowly, eyes widening when she saw him standing there, not hidden, not distant, not untouchable. Yes, sir, she asked quietly. You don't have to call me that, he said. She didn't know what to do with that. I noticed you're limping, he continued gently. Her shoulders stiffened. I'm fine. He didn't push. Instead, he surprised them both again. Would you like to sit for a moment? He asked. Just rest. She should have said no. She knew she should have. But something in his voice felt safe. She nodded. They sat across from each other, silence stretching, not awkward, just unfamiliar. I didn't hum tonight, she said suddenly, eyes fixed on her hands. I know, he replied. She swallowed. I didn't want to bother you. You weren't bothering me? He said softly. You were helping. That made her look up. Helping him. No one had ever said that before. Why do you work here, Jade? He asked. She hesitated, then answered honestly. Because it pays enough to keep me standing. He felt that answer settle somewhere deep. Days passed, then weeks, and slowly, quietly, their world shifted. Alexander began scheduling fewer late-night meetings. Jade found herself assigned more often to the executive floor. Their conversations remained brief, but meaningful. A nod, a question, a shared silence. He learned she liked tea more than coffee. She learned he hated loud rooms. Neither of them crossed a line, but something fragile was forming in the space between them. One night, as Jade finished cleaning, Alexander spoke again. You don't have to be invisible here, he said. She smiled faintly. Invisible is how I survived. He stepped closer, not too close. Then maybe, he said quietly, it's time you didn't have to anymore. Her heart raced, because for the first time, someone had seen her, not as a cleaner, not as a shadow, but as Jade. But what Jade didn't know was that loving a man like Alexander came with a price neither of them was ready to pay. Jade noticed the change before anyone else did. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It was the quiet kind of shift that only someone who paid attention would feel. Alexander stopped staying as late. The lights in his office turned off earlier now. Some nights, they didn't turn on at all. At first, Jade told herself it was nothing. CEOs were busy. Men like him had real lives. But the silence returned, and this time, it hurt. She tried to focus on her work, on the rhythm of cleaning, on the squeak of the cartwheels, on keeping her head down like she always had. But the 42nd floor felt colder without him. She caught herself glancing at his office, just once, then twice, before scolding herself. Don't. Hope was dangerous. Alexander, meanwhile, was losing a battle he never expected. The board had noticed his changes. "You've been distracted," one of them said sharply during a late meeting. Distracted. The word echoed uncomfortably. He had built his life on control, on distance, on never letting emotion bleed into power. And yet, Jade's quiet presence had slipped past every defense. So he did what powerful men always did when something threatened them. He pulled away. The night Jade finally saw him again, he looked different. Tired, tense, guarded. She stood frozen outside his office, cloth in hand, unsure whether to step in or turn away. "Jade," he said, catching her hesitation. Her heart skipped. "Yes?" "Come in." The office felt heavier than before. Alexander stood by the window, the city reflecting faintly in the glass behind him. "I owe you honesty," he said. She nodded, bracing herself. "There are things in my world," he continued, "that don't make room for someone like you." The words cut deeper than she expected. "I understand," she said quietly, but her hands trembled. "This isn't about what you deserve," he said quickly. "It's about what my life demands." She finally looked up at him. "And what do you want?" The question hung between them. Alexander said nothing, and that silence was answer enough. That night, Jade went home, feeling smaller than she had in years. She told herself she had imagined everything, the kindness, the connection, the way he had looked at her like she mattered. Fantasy, she reminded herself, was not reality. Days passed without a word. Then one evening, as Jade was leaving the building, a sleek black car stopped beside her. The window rolled down. Alexander sat inside. "Get in," he said. Her breath caught. "I can't," she whispered. "I won't ask again," he replied, not commanding, just honest. She hesitated. Then she opened the door. Inside the car, silence pressed in. "I tried to stay away," he said finally. "I failed." Her chest tightened. "This isn't safe," she said. "I know." "People like you don't fall quietly," she added. His gaze softened. "And people like you don't deserve to be hidden." The car stopped. He turned to her. "If I cross this line," he said, "there's no going back." Her heart raced. "Then don't," she whispered. But she didn't move away. Alexander leaned closer, just as a flash of cameras lit up the street outside. Someone had seen them. The flash came without warning. Bright, violent, unforgiving. Jade flinched as the light exploded through the car window. Another flash followed, then another. Phones raised, voices shouting questions they had no right to ask. Alexander reacted instantly, pulling the car forward, driving until the noise faded into the distance. When he finally stopped, the street was quiet, but the damage was already done. Jade's hands trembled in her lap. "This is why," she whispered. "This is why I said it wasn't safe." Alexander said nothing. There was nothing he could say that would undo what had happened. By morning, the world knew. Headlines flooded every screen. Zenith CEO caught in secret romance billionaire and his cleaner? A scandal in the glass tower. The photos blurred Jade's face, but not enough to protect her. The comments were worse. She planned this. Gold digger. She doesn't belong in his world. Jade sat alone on her bed, phone slipping from her fingers. She had survived many things in life, but being seen like this felt unbearable. So she made a choice. She packed a small bag, folded her uniform carefully, and walked away without leaving a note. At Zenith Group, the board's reaction was swift and cold. "You must distance yourself," the chairman said. "This affects the company. Choose wisely." Alexander listened in silence. For the first time in his life, power felt meaningless. "She's not a mistake," he said finally. "She's not a headline. She's not disposable." The room went quiet, but the truth was already clear. Protecting her meant letting her go. When Alexander learned Jade had resigned, something inside him broke. He drove to her apartment, knocked, waited. Nothing. A neighbor told him she had left before sunrise. Alexander returned to the office that night alone. The same office, the same glass walls, the same city lights. But everything felt hollow. Months passed. The headlines faded. The world moved on. Alexander still stayed late sometimes, but no humming filled the halls anymore. The 42nd floor had returned to silence. Then, one evening, while attending a charity event far from the towers, he heard it. A familiar tune, soft, unsteady, beautifully broken. He turned. Across the room stood Jade. No uniform, no fear in her eyes. Stronger, quieter, herself. Their eyes met. No cameras, no boardrooms, no shadows. Just two people who had once found each other in silence. Alexander walked toward her, not as a CEO, not as a man in power, but as someone finally willing to choose love without hiding. Jade didn't step back. Some love stories are loud. Theirs had always been quiet. But quiet didn't mean weak. Sometimes it meant real.